it's Gavin. Welcome back to Stormworks Basics Tutorial. It's going to be a real quick tutorial on how to ventilate your tanks. Now, ventilating your tanks is an important thing. This is something that has to be done in real life. Airplanes have fuel vents. Cars have fuel vents. Boats have fuel vents. As you take a liquid out of a container, you need to replace it with air, generally, at the same pressure as the external atmosphere. So at sea level, we have 1 atmosphere of pressure pushing on everything. And so as you try to draw a liquid out of a tank, if you do not replace that volume lost from the water or whatever liquid is in there with air at the same pressure as the external volume, you're going to end up in a situation where you're pulling a partial vacuum. All right, partial vacuum is an artificial low pressure. And so what happens is you're trying to crush the container by pulling the liquid out if you're not replacing it with an equal value of air pressure. And so what ends up happening is eventually your motor or your pumping system is not going to be strong enough to overcome that partial vacuum. The air pressure trying to push in is going to cause it so that your pump cannot overcome that. And so that's why we have, again, air venting systems in airplanes, boats, in cars, anywhere where you're drawing a liquid out, you're going to need to replace it. We can look at a really extreme case here where if you do not ventilate an oil tanker for a train, it will actually, the air pressure will crush the container. So pretty wild. As you can see there, the air pressure in the atmosphere is so strong that what they were doing is they were trying to pull the liquid out. They created a vacuum inside that tank. There was no air molecules pushing back out against the surface on the inside. And so what was happening is all the air pressure was pushing on the outside of that tanker car, and it ended up crushing it. And so what's happening is if you do not ventilate your tanks in game, just as in real life, you will get fuel starvation. This happens in airplanes. You know, my degree's in aeronautical science. I was a commercial airline pilot, and this is something we had to learn about because if you had a blocked fuel vent, the engine would eventually die because your pump would no longer be able to overcome the pressure. Again, this is something very realistic that was added with the pressure update. I think it's a great thing, and it is actually really simple to solve. Here is a picture of a fuel vent on an airplane. So if we go ahead and look here, this right here is the fuel vent for the fuel tanks on the airplane. The fuel tanks in this airplane, looks like a Cessna 172, are in the wings. And so what happens here is air pressure comes in. It comes in through this tube. It goes all the way up. It goes into the fuel tank. It ends at the top of the fuel tank. And as the fuel is sucked into the engine via the fuel pump or the carburetor, it then replaces that volume of fuel with air. So if you pull out a liter of fuel, you're going to put in a liter of air. Very simple. If you do not do that, this was something we actually had to check in the checklist. You will walk around the airplane and you will look in this tube and make sure that, for example, wasps used to love to build little nests in here. If a wasp built a nest in this pipe, you would be able to feed your engine for a little while, but eventually you would pull a partial vacuum in your tank, and then the engine would die because the pump for your engine would no longer be able to overcome the vacuum inside of the tank, and it would cause fuel starvation. So this is something very real that was added in the pressure update, and it is really pretty simple to solve. All right, so let's go ahead and look. This is from my module engine tutorial series. This one came out in November. This is part 1. I will include this in the description below. I showed you how to ventilate the tank there. Incredibly simple. Fuel tank. Put a T-valve. There's the hose anchor so you can refill your tank. You want to put a gas relief valve. All that really does is it makes it so that only gas can get in and out. Then you put on a fluid port. That's it. So what will happen is as you suck fuel out of this tank, it's going to cause the air to be able to go into the tank and replace that fuel. Again, if you do not do this, what's going to happen is you're going to get fuel starvation. Eventually, what's going to happen is you're going to pull a partial vacuum in here, and the engine is not going to be strong enough to pull that fuel past the vacuum, and your engine's going to die. I see post after post after post. My engine dies after 2.7 kilometers. My engine dies after 3 kilometers. What's happening is, again, you have enough air pressure in the tank to start with that the engine can pump the fuel in, but eventually you pull a vacuum, and eventually it is too much, and eventually, just like in real life, you get fuel starvation. This is, for example, why they tell you do not top off your car. So For example, if you're filling your car and you pull on the pump handle and the pump handle clicks and it stops pumping fuel, you will see people who don't know what they're doing pull on that pump handle again. That's called topping off. Most gas stations will have a sign that says no topping off. Your car manual will say, do not top off. Why? Because what happens is that stops before you hit the fuel vent. If you do that, you will fill your fuel vent with fuel, and you can then ruin your gas tank system. And what's going to happen is you're going to have fuel in a place that's not supposed to have fuel, and you might have a big mechanics bill. So there's a reason why the pump stops pumping when it does. All right, you're supposed to have an air gap in your fuel tank. It's supposed to be ventilated to the outside. This is a very realistic system. This is what you need IRL. So it is super simple to have this. All you do is you have a fuel tank. I do a T-valve so I can have a hose. You want a gas relief valve. All this does is this allows it so that the diesel does not go out through there. This prevents the diesel or whatever fuel you're using from escaping. So you're going to need this with all your liquid systems, just like you would in real life. Very, very simple, very realistic. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is I'm just going to pull that off, and we're going to block the system. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take that off. We're going to spawn this up. We'll fire this engine up, and we'll get it running, and we'll notice what the pressure does in the tank. Now we'll make a prediction, right? Real simple. Right, as we pull the fuel out, right, we're going to be pulling a partial vacuum. A partial vacuum is when the pressure decreases lower than atmospheric, so that's going to be less than 1. All right, engine's up and running. I'm going to rev the engine all the way up. Now let's watch our tank. All right, look at the pressure. As you can see, we start at 6 atmospheres. It is going down. Now, a lot of people have criticized the devs. They'll say to the devs, why did you put so much air pressure in there? That's not realistic. The devs probably did it to help out people who may not know as much about these fuel systems as I do or as other people do. The reason they probably added a positive air pressure was because people would complain if, hey, devs, I started my engine dies in 10 seconds, boo, game broken. The game not broken. What happens is a lot of people do not understand that if you pull a partial vacuum, you're going to end up in a situation where your engine will die. And so as you can see, you are losing pressure in this tank, and eventually you're going to pull a partial vacuum, and eventually the pump for the engine is no longer going to be able to overcome that vacuum that you've created. So let's go back to the original system here. So all we'll do, very simple, T-piece, gas relief valve. All this really does is it makes sure that only gases can come out of here. We'll grab a fluid port, very simple here. You can use the new ones or the old ones, whatever you like. Stick that on there. Now what's going to happen is as we draw fuel in, air pressure, this is going to create a negative pressure in here. It's going to allow the air to come in. Now, again, like I said, these tanks are pressurized. The devs have pressurized the tanks. They did that to help the new player. All right, it is not devs dumb. It is devs trying to help a new player out. All right. And so as you can see, the fluid port is showing that we are losing pressure in there. The pressure is going from an area of high pressure, as you can see, to an area of low pressure. Now, the devs have also pressurized liquids. My hypothesis on this is they're trying to make it so that the liquid can overcome some of the gas pressure sometimes. Again, to try to make it simpler for the average player who may not know all the physics or the systems required in some of these real-life vehicles. So now when you have this gas relief valve, now likely the diesel is at about 6-something atmospheres. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and start the engine up. All right, we're going to rev it up. Now what's going to happen is as we take in fuel from our tank, all right, it's going to allow air pressure in. Now, this is probably at quite a few decimal places below, but eventually, as you can see, since we allow air to get into the tank, when we do pull a vacuum, so a partial vacuum is less than atmospheric pressure. And so what's going to happen is eventually we're going to get to the point here where we pull a vacuum where the pressure inside the tank is less than the air pressure outside. This gas relief valve is going to allow air to come in and replace the fuel. As we take fuel out of the tank, we need to put air in the tank. Again, let's look at that GIF. All right, looking at the GIF again here, as you can see, it gets crushed. This is a real-world case. They're showing the audience that if you do not ventilate your tanks or if the vent gets blocked, that you can crush something as strong as a train car. As you can see here, they have a hose. It's pulling, likely in this case, just the air out. But if they pulled the liquid out, and let's say the air vent was blocked, the pump may be strong enough, as it was in this case, to pull a partial vacuum. As soon as the air pressure inside of this tanker car gets less than the critical strength of the steel, it's going to allow the air to crush it like a can, as you can see. And so this is a very realistic example of why you need to ventilate your tanks. You need to do it in game. It is super simple. So hopefully you guys found that helpful, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.